All right, so here we are. It's our first content lecture. You have all hopefully gotten settled into the Canvas page. You've got your notebook or your tablet out to make some notes. You do, right? If not, go ahead and pause this video now so that you can do that. I'm going to have you pause periodically and jot down some thoughts that will help you later on with your respond and discuss activities and probably with your quizzes too. Okay, now you're ready to dive into agricultural economics. First off, what pops into your head when I say the word economics? Go ahead and pause your video and take a second to write down the first three things that pop into your head when I say economics. Now, chances are you wrote down something about money, about markets or prices. Maybe you thought about graphs and statistics. All of these things are indeed parts of the study of economics. But economics as a discipline is so much bigger than that. On top of that, it's inextricable from so many other disciplines, from technology and culture, from issues of social justice, political science, and so many more. Now, when I learned economics in school, someone stood up in front of me and said, "These are the rules of economics. This is how people behave, and this is how markets behave." It became really easy for me to forget that economics is a social science. It is not a physical science with rigid laws like gravity. We, people, create and manage economic systems, and they are therefore dynamic. They change and evolve just like culture and society, just like us. In this class, we will study the classic topics that you would study in any Economics 101 class, specifically as they relate to the agricultural industry. But we're also going to think critically about our economy, examine its merits and flaws, and we'll think about how we may like to see our economic system evolve in the future. Okay, so back to today's lecture series. In this first week, we'll go over the following topics: the underlying concepts of scarcity and choice, microeconomics versus macroeconomics, the difference between positive and normative economics, and comparing types of economic systems. So before we jump into the key principles, let's talk about the scope of agricultural economics. We aren't just talking about farming here, people. In fact, farm and ranch operations on their own make up only about 2 to 4% of our nation's output. But if you take a step back and take a broader view of things, if you look at all of the industries that are related to the production of agricultural goods, like agricultural machinery, someone has to produce the tractors and all the equipment that we use on the farm. How about biotechnology? There's plant breeders working all the time to come up with disease-resistant varieties or varieties that will grow better in certain climates. There's a whole industry behind agricultural chemicals, pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, and also fertilizers. And then we have all of the processing that happens with the goods that come off of the farm, both food goods that we eat and fiber goods, things that we wear. So you can see that this is a really complex industry, and we'll keep that in mind as we learn about the application of economic principles to agriculture. Now, there are a few basic principles that are absolutely foundational to studying economics. The first one is scarcity. This principle says that there are limited amounts of every resource. This is obviously true when we think about resources like capital. We don't all have unlimited amounts of money in the bank to spend every day. But it's also true when we think about certain natural resources. Being in California, water might be one that comes to mind pretty quickly. How about land? Land is finite. There aren't infinite amounts of land on the earth. Here's one a lot of people don't think about. Time. My time is limited. Your time is limited. Daylight is limited. The growing season in many places is limited. We have limited human resources. That's things like labor or skills. After all, not everyone has the skill of being a diesel mechanic. So not everyone can fix your tractor. These are human resources. Then we have manufactured resources, things like equipment, agrochemicals, the infrastructure and facilities that we use. Our next principle to understand is that of choice. Now, you probably are aware of this, but everyone has to make choices every single day. Those choices can be really small and seem insignificant, like, do I want ranch dressing or blue cheese dressing on my salad? Or they can be big and have major effects on our futures. Because time is scarce, our time is limited, you have to decide if you want to go to school more and work less now so that maybe you can make more money in the future, or do you want to work and make more money now and go to school part-time? Similarly, since most farmers don't have an unlimited amount in the bank, a farmer may have to decide whether they want to spend money to hire more field crew so they can harvest faster, or to spend that money to buy a new piece of equipment so that they can grow more volume. By default, all choices have an associated opportunity cost. An opportunity cost is all of the potential benefits that you give up when you make one choice over another choice. Here's a really silly example. Hopefully it'll stick in your head. Say I am the star of the show The Bachelorette. It's never going to happen, but we'll just imagine. In the final round, I choose handsome Chuck over charming Steve. Now, my opportunity cost in this scenario is any happiness I would have enjoyed by being with charming Steve. I gave that up in the hopes that I would have more happiness being with handsome Chuck. Now, being as I will never be the star of The Bachelorette, let's look at a more realistic example. Say you're a farmer in Salinas, and you're deciding what crops to put into a new field. Now, you may know that if you grow only lettuce in a field, you'll make around $10,000 per acre. But if you grow kale instead of lettuce, you may get about $14,000 per acre. Here's a third scenario. If you grow lettuce and kale together in the same field, you might make $18,000 per acre. Now, that's a no-brainer with no other factors to influence your decision, right? You're going to choose to grow both lettuce and kale in the same field to make the $18,000. The benefits of the next best choice, growing kale, that's your opportunity cost, the $14,000 per acre you would have gotten from growing kale. So let's pause and just jot down, what's an opportunity cost of a decision you made today or this week? It can be something really silly and minor, like missing out on the crunchiness of cornflakes because you decided to have eggs for breakfast instead of cornflakes. So here's the bottom line of all economic decision making. Do the benefits of a choice exceed the costs, both the opportunity costs and whatever it costs you to make a decision? Here's another principle that we have to look at. I'll move my little face so that you can see our friend Adam Smith here. Specialization. In our economies and in many of our individual lives, we specialize. We focus on those tasks at which we are best suited or that we maybe enjoy the most. So here's an example from my house. I can whip up a pretty tasty meal quickly, but I really don't like doing dishes. My husband is a slower cook, but doesn't mind doing dishes. So we each choose to specialize. I make the meal, and he washes the dishes afterward. Therefore, we both make the most of our time, energy, and enjoyment. People in firms and agriculture specialize too. You don't bring your pest advisor out to your farm and say, oh, by the way, when you're done setting those pheromone traps, will you fix my tractor? That would be really inefficient and probably ineffective because a pest advisor specialist wouldn't be as skilled in tractor maintenance as a diesel mechanic. So you're going to get a diesel mechanic to come look at your tractor. Similarly, regions and nations also tend to specialize depending on factors like their climate and growing conditions, access to trade routes or labor, or what natural resources are available. California's Central Valley has a temperate climate. We've got fertile soils and extensive water infrastructure. These things all make it an ideal location to grow vegetables. So we grow lots of vegetables here. Whereas a place like Saskatchewan, a province in Canada, also has fertile soils, but it's really, really dry. They have warm summers, but very cold winters. These factors all make it a great place to grow wheat, so they grow lots of wheat. Overall, specialization leads to greater efficiency, which allows economies to produce more and therefore to grow. It also lays the foundations for trade, since we don't each produce every good and service we need. So here's a little bit of economic history for you. Back in the 1700s, there was this guy named Adam Smith. He was a Scottish economist and moral philosopher who's often referred to debatably as the father of modern economics. Now, he wrote a book, a very, very famous book called The Wealth of Nations. And it's arguably the most influential text when it comes to the development of our modern economic system. In that book, he promotes specialization as a means to increase collective productivity and wealth for the reasons that we just talked about. Interestingly, in the very same book, he has this to say, that when a laborer becomes very specialized, performing only one or two tasks, he has no occasion to exert his understanding, that means to think for himself, or to exercise his invention in finding out expedients for removing difficulties which never occur, meaning he's got no problem-solving skills. He naturally loses, therefore, the habit of such exertion and generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. This is a pretty contradictory statement to what he said earlier. So let's pause for a minute and think about this. Go ahead and pause your video and take a minute to jot down your thoughts on these kind of two different views that Adam Smith has. Can you connect either of these ideas to something in our modern world? Right, so with that background, let's actually define the term economics. We've got it right here. The social science that deals with how consumers, producers, and societies choose among the alternative uses of scarce resources in the process of producing, exchanging, and consuming goods and services. If we break down the word economics and we look at the etymology or the origins of the word itself, it comes from the Greek term oikonomia, oikos meaning house, and nomos meaning law or custom. Aristotle used the term to mean the science of household management. I'd call that a pretty microeconomic view. It wasn't until the late 1700s that the term became broader. The term economics was then used to describe the science of wealth by the French. And from there, it evolved into the term we defined today. Now let's look at a more specific term, agricultural economics. It's basically the same as our first definition of economics, but it's got a little modifier at the end. So agricultural economics is the social science that deals with how consumers, producers, and societies choose among the alternative uses of scarce resources in the production, processing, and marketing of food and fiber products. So there you go. Here's our intro to ag economics.